Today on TOKKANTE we're doing the first installment of a three-part series about going hands-on with IWC pilot watches. So I had the opportunity to go hands-on with the automatic Spitfire, the Mark 18 and then the brand new big Pilot 43. And I was gonna make one big video comparing them all and going into detail, but then I realized that I had so much to say and so much to nitpick about each one of them that it was gonna be too long. So we're gonna break it up into three different videos, and today we're gonna do the automatic Spitfire, next week we'll do the Mark 18, and then the week after we'll do the big Pilot 43. So stay tuned if you wanna know my thoughts on each one of them. So in this video, I'll have a few words about IWC in general and their pilot watches, and then why IWC now for me, and then also a few words about this boutique because this is kind of a special one, and then we'll go in details on the automatic Spitfire and what I think of it. Hi everyone and welcome, I'm Ben. So why IWC now? Well, as some of you may know by watching my previous videos, I'm still looking for my perfect daily wearer. And yes, I'm still considering the Glashütte Original CQ, especially the one, the green dial in 39.5mm. But for some reason that I mentioned in my previous video, you know that I'm still undecided. So I was kind of looking for a new daily driver watch, and I came across an old video from Adrian from Buck & Jack about the IWC automatic Spitfire. And at about the same time, the new big Pilot 43 was released, and that got me interested again in the pilot watches of IWC. And I know that the pilot watches collections of IWC are kind of messy. There are so many different models and they're a little bit disorganized, and so I decided to get into it and really learn about it and find out whether that Spitfire or another one might be a good candidate for a daily driver. So as you may or may not know, you have like three different collections within the pilot watches at IWC. Some say it's 5, but I say it's 3, and 2 special versions. So the first one would be the classic collection. That's where you find the big Pilot, as well as the Mark 18, and then the Pilot Chronograph 41 and the Pilot 36, and also that weird blue one that just came out, but it's ceramic and it should probably be in the Top Gun. So then you have the Top Gun collection, which is a collection of pilot watches made entirely of ceramic cases, and this is where they're much more modern in spirit, and this is where WC tests new complications and basically the modern versions. The other one is the more classic. And then you have the third one, which is the Spitfire collection. So those are based on the Spitfire aircraft, which was small and agile and based on that amazing engine apparently. So the Spitfire is a little bit more vintage inspired. They're not vintage reissues per se, but they are vintage inspired. They are smaller, and then they all have in-house manufacturing movements, supposedly. We'll talk about that later. And then you have the Le Petit Prince and then the Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So Le Petit Prince are just blue dial versions of mostly the classic collection models, and the Antoine de Saint-Exupéry are a brown dial version of the classic and possibly even the Top Gun, I'm not sure, but there's only 2 right now at the moment. So they're not really a collection per se, just special dial versions basically. So if we look at the history of IWC pilot watches, we find that IWC was in a very unique position because they are Swiss and they are in neutral countries. So they kind of provided watches to both the British Royal Air Force, but also at the same time the German Luftwaffe Nazi High Command. And so you get those two identities or those two styles of pilot watches in their collections. So IWC started making watches in 1936 with what we call now the Mark 9, but that's not the official name, and it wasn't called the Mark 9 at that time, but that was a 38mm, I think, a watch that was sold even to the general public. But then at the start of the war in 1939, I think they provided the first Mark 10 to the British Royal Air Force, and that was a 38mm watch. But then in 1940, actually, the Nazi High Command had a tender and called on 5 different companies to provide watches, Flieger pilot watches for the Luftwaffe. So the 5 brands, we all know them by now, but there was Vempe, there was Laco, and there was Stowa, there was Alange und Söhne even, and there was IWC. So IWC is the only non-German one. And so they are actually the one who provided the least number of Flieger watches to the Luftwaffe. And I think in 1940 they only made about 1,200 movements. It was the 53 caliber 53 movement, their own movement. And 1,000 of those went into Flieger watches for the Luftwaffe, and 200 of those went into deck clock for the Royal Navy. So already, they were playing both sides of the war at the time. So fast forward, after that, those were A dial. There was the B dial during the war, but I think IWC wasn't involved in that. And after the war in 1948, this is when they actually provided pilot watches for the Royal Air Force with the Mark 11, the famous Mark 11. So that one actually shrank into a 36 mil and had a kind of a different dial. And this is what started the Mark series at IWC. So that Mark 11 was in use from 1949 to 1981. And then it kind of stopped, and in 1994 they came back with the Mark 12. There was no Mark 13 and 14, but then there was a Mark 15, 16, 17, and then the current Mark 18 now. So also at the same time you have the Big Pilot that came back in 2002, and now the Big Pilot 43. So those are the more Flieger inspired German style pilot watches, styling and inspiration basically. And so you see in the collection that you have both basically the RAF style pilot watches and then the Flieger style pilot watches. So when I looked at it, I thought, okay, I'm gonna pick 3 of those for me to compare and to try. So this is why I picked the first one, the automatic Spitfire. So this is basically the base model in the Spitfire collection, the 3-hander. That is not a vintage reissue of the Mark 11, but it is heavily inspired by the Mark 11, by the one that they provided in 1948. Then I picked the Mark 18 because this is basically the current iteration, and it symbolizes the evolution of the Mark series over the years and what the Mark 11 has become now to be the Mark 18. And then also the new Big Pilot 43 because this is, you know, the brand new shiny toy of IWC, and this is more of a German aesthetic, and you know how much I like German watches, so I thought I have to look at that. And when people think of IWC, they usually think Big Pilot. That one is enormous, so if you can do the Big Pilot, then maybe I can do the Big Pilot 43. So now just a few words about the IWC boutique, because I didn't go to an AD to try these watches on. I went to the brand new IWC HAUS Boutique that's located in Central in Hong Kong, and that is the first ever in the world boutique that was opened in partnership with Mercedes-Benz. So the name HAUS is the German word for house, so how creative of them. And I guess it's kind of similar to the AP House concept, but now it's called the IWC HAUS. And it's based on 2 modern day icons, which is the G-Wagon for Mercedes and then the Big Pilot for IWC. So with this concept, when you go in on the ground floor, you find a cafe where you can go have lunch, and it's usually very busy during lunchtime. And you also have a Mercedes on display in the boutique. So I think it was an AMG, but I know nothing about car. I don't know why it's not a G-Wagon, because it's based on that modern day icon, but anyway, there was a green AMG there. And then in the back of it you have the IWC boutique, and then you know, the sales associate told me that if you go upstairs, then there is a restaurant actually that is only open at night, and that is open to the public, but you have to make reservations long in advance, because IWC and Mercedes-Benz joined their loyalty program, and basically loyalty members of IWC or Mercedes-Benz, or clients of IWC or Mercedes-Benz, and then VIPs and celebrities, whatever, all have priorities to get a table. And then every month they will have a new creative menu with a celebrity chef. Or I'm not very interested in that side of the story, but I just wanted to try the watches on, and it's interesting to do it in the world's first, you know, boutique concept. So first, let's look at the case and the overall wearing experience. So this one is the smallest of the bunch and comes in at 39mm diameter, which we all know is the perfect size for a daily wearer, Rolex Explorer, right? But you have to note that the lug-to-lug or wingspan, pun intended, is 50mm on this watch. So it's quite long for a 39mm watch. However, when I put it on my wrist, I actually thought it looked tiny. And it reminded me of the experience of wearing a 36mm Explorer. But after a while and looking at it, I thought, yes, it actually makes sense and it looks good. I think for a daily wearer, it looks great. My wrist is 6.75 inches or 17 centimeters in circumference, so it looked fine. I had no problem with the 50 lug-to-lug, but that's something maybe for you to consider. However, I have to mention that the lugs curve down, so I think they wrap around your wrist quite well. Even though they are long, it's not like the Longines Legend Diver where they're quite straight. And they're even better, I think, than the Mark 18 lugs, which is 51 lug-to-lug, but it's also quite straight, those lugs. So I think to me, no problem. The case finishing, you know, is very, in a way, utilitarian, it's mostly brushed. There is just a little tiny polished bevel on the side of the case. I think it's great for a daily wearer. You don't need to worry too much about it, and it doesn't scream, you know, polished or anything. It has kind of a smallish crown. I think it's smaller even than the Mark 11, but it makes sense. I mean, it's just something to get used to. It's not like a big Flieger Pilot crown or onion crown or anything like that. Another good thing about this watch is that it's only 10.8 millimeter thin, and that is great. I love thin movements. I love thin watches. I think 39 by 10.8, that's a really great size. And that even includes the movement enclosed in a soft iron cage to make it anti-magnetic. So that has to be quite a thin movement in it. And then finally, it has 20 millimeter lug width. So you can either get it on a NATO or on a leather strap, but I'm a bracelet guy, and I found out later that you can actually adapt the bracelet from the Mark 18 onto it. So that's a huge plus for me. Or you could go with a plethora of, you know, aftermarket options at 20 mil. So the watch as a pilot watch is of course anti-magnetic, as this is one of the major requirements of a pilot watch, is to be anti-magnetic. And you may be thinking, well, of course it's obvious. Well, one of the other watches that we'll look at next week or the week after, you'll be surprised to find out, is actually not anti-magnetic. So this one is, and is also water resistant to 60 meters, which is not huge, but I think is plenty enough for me. I don't intend to take this watch diving or even swimming, so 60 is fine. Some people will prefer it to be 100, but I'm fine with 60 meters water resistance. Now let's look at the dial. Possibly like many of you, what attracted me to this watch is the dial. When I saw it on my YouTube feed and I saw the Bark and Jack video with this dial, that's what made me click on it. So it has a very, you know, vintage inspired kind of dial with the warmth of the hands, you know, the creamy lume, and then the white numerals, and then the red Spitfire marking on the black matte dial. So I kind of like that, and I wanted to know what it was about, right? So IWC, you know, told me this is one of the purest pilot watch they've ever done, that's closest to the Mark 11, you know, except the red marking for Spitfire and the date. So let's look at that actually, because yes and no. So, you know, yes, because actually one thing that they've done very well is the numerals. They even showed me a book with the original dial of the Mark 11 and showed me that the numerals are exactly the same as the Mark 11. And you can see that, I'll put it on the screen, especially with the number 7 and number 4, how they are really squared off. The font is really squared. Whereas on the, you know, Mark 18 and even on the Big Pilot 43, they use a rounded font that is more modern in spirit. So this is one thing that they've done really well. So this is not meant to be a reissue, but it's meant to be heavily inspired by the Spitfire watch, the Mark 11, right? So this, they've done well, and I think the matte black dial, they did very well. And even I will say, okay, the date shouldn't be there because the Mark 11 didn't have it, the Mark 12 had it, but it's well placed, and even the fact that it's a white a date wheel, it doesn't bother me because the rest of the numerals are white. So I think it actually makes sense. It's where it should be because the movement is properly sized, and it takes the place of you know, number 3. So I think that's fine. Doesn't bother me. I mean, I would prefer it without the date. I'm a no date guy, but it's well done, and so, you know, I'll take it. And the red Spitfire marking, same. You know, it used to have the T for tritium back then, but I think you know, it's there for branding. Maybe it shouldn't be red, but that's fine. I think it looks good. Now, where it differs and where I think there are some issues with the dial is number 1 with the triangle at 12 that has those 2 dots, you know, on either side. And this is from the German Flieger watch design. This is not from the Mark 11. This is not from the Royal Air Force, you know, pilot watches. It should not be there. This is German design. So they put that on it because now we've come to associate pilot watches with this trait. But that's a departure from the Mark 11. And also the most faux pas, I would think, it's the hands. Because the hands, also those sword hands, are Flieger hands. They are not the hands that were on the Mark 11 or the Mark 12 or even the Mark 15. It's only started with the Mark 16 that they put sword hands on there. So the dial, if you think of it, you know, it's kind of a mismatch of you know, British pilot watches with inspiration from the Mark 11, but also Flieger watch design, especially with the hands and the 2 dots around the triangle. So for some people, that could be a deal breaker, say that doesn't make any sense at all. And how could you say this is one of the purest watch design, because it's kind of like a best of different things. Or you could decide that, well, they've been on the Mark series since the Mark 16 anyway, that came out in 2012, I think. So it's been a long time, and this is what we now associate with the pilot watch. So, you know, overall it looks good, and you know, why the hell not, I guess. I have no problem with the creamy loom. Yes, Fortina, the whole thing about Fortina, I'm not against Fortina, and I think in this case it gives some kind of warmth and some kind of character to the watch. To be honest, that's very subjective to me, it doesn't bother me. So you have that creamy loom on the hands and then also on the 4 cardinal points, and this is the only loom that you'll get on the watch. And I know some people have complained that the loom is quite poor, and same for the Mark 18, the loom is quite poor, but this is actually faithful to, you know, the original, going back to the Mark 11, because this is how the loom was done at that time. So not the best loom, but it's acceptable. I think it's fine. You can still tell the time even at night. Now let's talk about the movement. And you know me, there's always something that bothers me, so I want to nitpick a little bit about that. The new Spitfire collection of IWC is supposed to be inspired by, you know, the Spitfire aircraft and how small and agile it was because of its amazing engine, and so it was very fast and very maneuverable, and that's why, you know, the watches in the Spitfire collection have smaller case sizes and they are thin, and they're all supposed to have, you know, in-house manufacturer movements. Okay, so let's look at that. The automatic Spitfire has the new IWC manufacturer in-house caliber 32110. And this is a great movement. You know, if you look at it, it has the new magic lever, you know, bi-directional pole winding system that's inspired from the Peloton system that they have in their higher end manufacturer movement, and that allows, you know, the rotor to wind bi-directionally, and it's disconnected from the winding gear, so it's supposed to be shock proof, and so it's not as good as Peloton, but it's still very good. It also comes with silicone parts like the silicone escape wheel and the silicone lever, the pallet fork, so there should be no wear and tear in between, and there is no lubricant, and they've come up with new lubricants that allow the movement to be serviced only between 5 and 10 years. And also, most importantly, or more practically, it has 72-hour power reserve. It's a very thin movement. I think it's 4 millimeter thin. So even when you put it in a soft iron cage, it's totally anti-magnetic, and it will fit into the 10.8 mil case. So it's all great. On paper, it's a great movement. Where I have a problem is why they call it in-house, because actually if you research, this came up because I asked the sales associate, you know, how come this movement in the Spitfire 72-hour power reserve, but then the higher end movement in the Big Pilot 43 has only 60-hour power reserve? And then he gave me kind of a vague answer, like, oh, well, you know, they are different architecture, and they didn't really convince me. And the movement in the Big Pilot 43 is much bigger. So I thought, you know, if they can do 72 in a small, thin movement, they should be able to do more than 60 in the big one. And you know me, that landed me on Google and trying to find out why, and you know, you go into a rabbit's hole, and one thing leads to another. And what I find out is actually this movement is not made by IWC. It is made by the Richmond-owned Val Fleurier movement manufacturer, which is the white label movement manufacturer owned by Richmond, fully owned by Richmond, and this is why they can call it in-house, that makes and provide movement to a bunch of other brands. So they make movement for IWC, they make movement for Cartier, they make movement for Baume & Mercier, for even entry-level Piaget, and apparently entry-level Vacheron Constantin, or because they use Cartier movement that are actually Val Fleurier. So, and on top of that, Val Fleurier actually based their movement design on main plates of ETA movement. So this movement, the caliber 32110, is based on the main plate of the ETA 2892, which is a very good movement. I have no problem with the ETA 2892. They do that a lot. They also base other calibers on ETA 70, on Valjoux 7750, and then they build the movement on top of that. So it's heavily modified, yes, but can you call that in-house? Maybe not, because it's not an original design. It's just an improvement on an existing design architecture, and same for the 2892. So this is the issue, you know, within Richmond, only basically Jaeger-LeCoultre, and then mostly Vacheron Constantin, and then Arlange Unzener, and then Cartier for their higher end calibers will do things completely in-house. But for other brands, you know, they get a lot of their movement from Val Fleurier. So my problem is that they shouldn't call it an in-house IWC caliber. They should call it an IWC exclusive Val Fleurier ETA modified caliber, because that's what it is. It's a 2892 that's heavily modified, Bal Fleurier, that is sold to IWC and then rebranded as an IWC caliber. So I have no problem with the caliber itself. I'm sure it's a good movement, and I think as a daily wearer, everyday watch, the 72-hour power reserve is great, and I think it will be easily serviceable because of the architecture, and it's great. I have no problem with it, and it's been heavily improved and modified. But it's just in the naming of it, and IWC is very guilty of that because they use the in-house branding a little bit too easily, right? Because I heard that even their higher end calibers, we look at the 8 series, the 8000 series later, is actually also based on the 7750. Now let's look at the different bands that you can put on this thing. So when you purchase the watch, you have two options. You can get it on the NATO that has a leather, underside lining, or you can get it on a leather strap. So as a palette watch, the leather strap makes perfect sense, and also the NATO goes back to what the Mark 11 used to come with. So this is why IWC told me they only give those two options and not a bracelet, because they want to keep in with the spirit of the Spitfire, and so it should be on a NATO or on a strap. But I am a bracelet guy. And every watch I have has to be on a bracelet. Even when I got my Speedmaster First Omega in Space, which comes on the strap, the first thing I did is order the Forstner bands because I had to put it on the bracelet. So at the boutique, I was about to actually told them this, that I think if I have to, discount one of the three, or not consider one of the three, I think I can't consider the Spitfire because there is no bracelet. But I was a bit upset about that because I really liked it and I like how it wears, but why isn't there a bracelet? And I asked them, are they going to come up with a bracelet later as an option? And he said no, because that's not in the spirit of the Spitfire collection. But I did some research and I found out that actually the bracelet of the Mark 18 fits perfectly on the Spitfire. It's 20mm lug width, it's the same, and as you can see on the screen now, some people have actually purchased the bracelet separately, and if you get the one from the black dial Spitfire Mark 18, which is totally brushed and no polish, and you put it on Spitfire, I think it's a great look, and I don't care if it's not original or if it's not in the spirit of the Spitfire, I think it looks great, and so that puts it back in the running for me, because I think I will get it maybe on the NATO and then get the bracelet and possibly get the free leather strap as well. Actually, if you ask IWC about the bracelet, whether it will fit on the Spitfire, I've seen emails of other people in forums who ask, and the official answer is that they will tell you the Mark 18 bracelet is not an option for the Spitfire. And so the wording is very carefully chosen, because they're not telling you that it won't fit, they're just telling you that it is not an option, because they want to separate the two collections, and so there shouldn't be any crossover. But it's been confirmed that you can get the Mark 18 bracelet and you can put it on the Spitfire. I'll talk about the bracelet more in the next week video, but this is one of the best bracelet in the business. IWC is known for their amazing bracelets, so this is a great option if you can add it to your Spitfire. The NATO is pretty good, it's very high quality. Like I said, it has a leather lining on the underside, so it's very well made. And when it's not a cheap NATO by any means, and when you put it on, you get that aviator style. You really get a cool styling. It's just that for me, in Hong Kong, it's very hot, sticky, and humid, and I'm not sure how much I would wear this. Possibly I would put it on in the winter because it looks quite cool. But in the summer, there's no way I could do that because it's gonna stick to my wrist, and that's gonna be gross. And same for the leather strap. The leather straps are very well made. They are Santoni straps made in Italy, I believe. Very well made, very thick, and that gives you that very aviator look. If you're into it, then it's great. I think I could also possibly wear it on leather sometimes, but I'm not big on leather straps, so I didn't even try it on the leather. But keep in mind though that this is not a quick change strap like the Big Pilot 43, so you'll have to do the change by yourself. So in conclusion, let's look at the pluses and minuses of this watch. First, the pluses, and there are a lot of them. I think this watch is very wearable as a daily wearer. It's very light, it's very thin, it fits me like a glove, and I think it's very elegant as well, like the Spitfire, and then it has that in-house movement, which, if we're objective, it's a great movement, and it has the 3-day power reserve. 72-hour power reserve is great. If I put it down, I wear something else, I come back, that's great. Nowadays, I think it's becoming the new standard, 72-hour power reserve. So I'm happy with that. you know, I think it's overall, you know, it could be a great option. Now, if we look at the minuses, so it's mostly about the looks really of the dial. I'm wondering sometimes whether the dial is going to be as timeless as maybe the more classic Mark 18. And maybe it's because of the creamy loom, of the red marking. I just wonder whether it has that little bit of a fashion watch look to it, and whether it's going to look as good or it's going to be as respected, you know, in 10 years, or when people, you know, move on from that vintage reissue kind of a trend. But I think it does look very good now. The other minus was, I think, you know, the lack of bracelet, but I have solved that, so I have to remove that from the minuses, and now it's actually a neutral because I can put the Mark 18. And then the last minus, I want to mention it. I didn't mention it when I talk about the movement, but I've been reading recently a few reports of people who have reported an issue with the movement, is that when you set the time and you push back the crown, the minute hand will jump. So it's a little bit like the Oris Caliber 400 issue, right? So it's not really a problem. Apparently, IWC has said that this is normal for this movement. It is just a quirk. So of course you can look at it and say, well, they say it's normal, but it's normal for this movement, but it shouldn't happen to begin with. So I don't know whether, you know, that happens a lot or it only happened with a few people, and I don't know if that would bother you. So I just want to mention it here. When I tried it in store, it didn't do it. I don't think that would stop me, but you know, it's there. So in conclusion, you know, I think this watch is really in the running for me, maybe to get this before I would get the Glashütte original. I could get this first. It's also, you know, the cheapest. To be honest, another big plus is that it's the cheapest of the three. And you know, if you can get it on a discount, it's even better. You could get this first, get the Glashütte later, maybe when they come up with another version that fixes the little things that you don't like about it. So what do you think about it? You know, let me know in the comments. Stay tuned for next week. We'll look at the Mark 18, also another great choice. And then the week after, we'll do the Big Pilot 43. So, you know, subscribe for more content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.